Jennifer. I'm the chairman of the CPA Mountain Flying Committee, and it's a committee of two. Well, it's actually more like a committee of four with Walt Barbo and Terry Barbo, essential members helping us out with registration and logistics. Bill Dunn is my co-conspirator when we teach this, teach the full course. He's works out at Denver TradeCon. This is our, I think this is our 30th year of doing the mountain flying course. And we put on a full course. We had to cancel both of them last year because of COVID. We are tentatively scheduling one for this year, August, I believe it's August 23rd. It will be at Rocky Mountain Metro. It's a full day of ground school. Usually takes about 8 hours or so in ground school. And then there's a flying part. It's optional, but we highly recommend it. You fly with one of our instructors and actually go up and fly in the mountains. And that's usually most of the day flying. We have a prescribed course that we go through of 4 or 5 airports, depending on experience and past experience and what the weather's doing and whether you want to pay the fee at Aspen or not. So, you know, we'd love to have you join the course. You can check coloradopilots.org, our CPA website, and go down to Mountain Flying and take a look there and sign up there. Basically, you need to call Terry Barbo and sign up. So tonight, what I want to do is kind of give you an overview. This is a presentation similar to a presentation I have given at Oshkosh several times in the forums there. And it's kind of an overview. I hit a few things here and there. It's obviously not a complete mountain flying course, and I don't expect you to be a mountain pilot when you come out of here, but it does give you some ideas of some things to watch out for. And you know, if you've been a mountain pilot before, maybe you don't have a lot of recent time, it'll give you some things to remember in your from your training. So the first thing is, you know, those of us who've been flying around Colorado for a long time know that Colorado is a really pretty place to fly. Lots of beautiful scenery to fly, but it is very unforgiving. This is one of my favorite scenes right here. This is on the ramp at Leadville, looking up at the Collegiate Peaks and Massive and Mount Albert, and then down south toward the rest of the Collegiate Peaks. But right here on the ramp where I'm standing, where I took this picture, we're at 10,000 feet, or just under 10,000 feet MSL. And most people get very surprised for a variety of reasons when they get up at 10,000 feet trying to operate their airplane off an airport. So a couple of things for those who may not be from around here or may be new to the area. Topography plays a big role in the kind of weather that we have. And I'm going to talk a lot about weather tonight and how it impacts what you need to do in mountain flying. So we have 54 peaks over 14,000 feet. That doesn't sound like a lot, but we also have over 600 over 13,000 feet. So, you know, we're very high average altitude here in the state. Most of the airports along the Front Range are well over 5,000 feet MSL. So even just coming to the Front Range, you're going to be operating in the summertime, you're going to be operating at high density altitudes. We also have the highest public use airport in North America at Leadville, and that's at 9934. It's an easy airport to get into. You know, terrain-wise, it's not challenging. It's the density altitude that surprises people. And then the winds down in the Arkansas Valley. So it's something you need to go in first time. You need to go in with an instructor. So a little bit about flight preparation. First of all, you need to talk about NOTAMs. What are they, especially this time of year? You know, it's snowing up there from, you know, September through May probably. and so there's snow on the ground all the time up there, and so you need to check the NOTAMs for runway conditions. You also need to get a really good briefing for alternate routes. When I get a briefing for flying in Colorado, for flying up in the mountains, normally if you're going out east, you can get a route briefing that covers, I think, ForeFlight or the other briefing tools will give you like a 50 or 100-mile corridor along your route. When I get a briefing for a mountain flight, whether it's Colorado or Alaska or anywhere else, I want to get a full state briefing. I want to know what my options are, because you can't just turn and go direct somewhere else. You've got to pay attention to the mountains, and they limit your route options. So I want to know what all the alternate routes might be for where I'm going. You also need to be aware of special use airspace, such as TFRs, and we found that out in spades this summer with all the forest fires. We don't have a lot of TFRs except in fire season, and now, we've got winter, spring, summer, and fire. So those are kind of the 4 seasons anymore, unfortunately, and that's pretty much what we're going to have to live with. So you really have to pay attention to the TFRs. Now, in general, for weather briefing, what we recommend is you need to check the winds aloft at 9 and 12 and probably 15,000 feet as well. If the winds aloft going across the mountaintops are greater than 25 knots or so, then you probably shouldn't go. And I'll talk about an example of why that's the case here in a little bit. You also want to look at wind speed shear. How is the shear as you go up and down in altitude? Generally, if you have a wind shear of greater than 6 knots per 1,000 feet vertically, that's often an indication of possible severe turbulence. So you really need to pay attention not only to just the speed, but how the shear profile is as you go up and down. And then for winter operations, like we're in here, do you have engine heaters? Is there a place to plug them in if you've got plug-in heaters like Tannis or something like that? Is there de-ice service at the airport you're going to? If you go to some of these airports, they're not well equipped. There may not be a ground service card if you run your battery down. If you have a mechanical problem, there may not be A&P service nearby. So you need to really look at all of these. They're not outback airports by any stretch of the imagination, but they simply don't have a lot of the facilities that you might expect at a larger airport like Centennial or Fort Collins or someplace like that. And if there's ever any doubt about the conditions, whether it's the condition of your airplane, your knowledge about flying in the mountains, especially in the wintertime, or anything else about the flight, consider leaving your airport at a nice VFR airport down here in the Front Range or on the West Slope, and get a rental car. I was participating in a discussion this morning on Facebook. A guy coming out here wanting to go to Steamboat in a in a normally aspirated Saratoga from the flatland snow mountain flying experience. He was proud of the fact that he had an instrument rating, and my counsel to him was, don't. He's going to come out here in March. My counsel to him was, fly to Fort Collins or Cheyenne and rent a car. And oftentimes that's the best thing to do. Even if you're experienced, the weather, especially this time of year, just is not conducive to flying in a low-powered airplane like most of the things that we're flying. Also, parking space is at a premium in the mountains. Aspen, Eagle, sometimes Kremling, Rifle. The high rollers like to fly their big airplanes into a place like Aspen, and so here, this is a picture of the line a few years ago at Aspen, and this is the entire line of the parking ramp at Aspen, lined with with jets. If you're a citation, you're kind of low class here. You need to be a Gulfstream or something like that. So you need to make sure that there's a place to park. And even in the summertime, here's a satellite view I got off of Google Earth, and this is from July of looks like 2010. And again, they've got jets parked all over the place. So even in the summertime, places like Aspen are going to be packed. There are landing fees. The price of gas is really high, so you need to take all those things into consideration. This is the GA ramp from a few years ago at Aspen, and obviously you can see, there's really no place to park. So keep that in mind if you're going to the hills and you're going to stay for any period of time. Some typical winter NOTAMs. This is after a snowstorm a couple of years ago, I think in February. And so down here, Fort Collins was closed, KFNO was closed doing snow removal. But one thing to look at are the FICON NOTAMs. FICON is field condition NOTAMs, and that's where you're going to find the condition of the field. I mean, whether the runways or taxiways have got snow on them, or they got ice on them, or there's snow berms, and so on. You can see here we've got several for Aspen KASE, where taxiway, all surface markings obscured, all signs obscured. They've covered up all the signs with snow plows. So they piled the snow up and all the signs are gone. Runway 33, signs all obscured. The FICON for Aspen, 2 inches of dry snow and ice, over ice observed. That makes it, braking action is not going to be good at all. So also, and then on the ramp at Aspen, the North General Aviation apron, FICON, thin, dry snow over ice, 8-foot snow piles. So, in the middle of the winter, it's a very inhospitable place. You really have to be careful, even operating on the ground up there. So, so keep that in mind as well. Always check the NOTAMs. And then, of course, the fire TFRs. This is from 2013, I believe, when we had all the previous huge fire season we had. So TFRs all over the place. Always look out for TFRs, fire and otherwise. We sometimes have some unusual TFRs. Here's one from Denver Center. This is around Ouray, and it's a TFR up to 14,000 feet for avalanche control. If you're not familiar with it, the Colorado Department of Transportation uses an old howitzer to shoot explosives up to control avalanches. So they sometimes will put a TFR up to close the airspace down low. So it's kind of an unusual TFR that you probably don't see very many other places. Now, density altitude in the summertime, especially, is an issue. Even down here on the Front Range, before you even get to the mountains. This is at Centennial. I believe this was in July. It's late in the evening, so this is probably about 7 or 7:30 or so in the evening, just before the sun goes down. And you can see that the density altitude, even that late in the day, in the summertime, is 7,300 feet. So just coming to the Front Range, and it's going to be the same thing on the west slope going to Grand Junction. The hot weather that we have in the summertime is going to be an issue, even before you get to the mountains. So we always recommend going to the mountains early and getting out early, before the days get warm up in the mountains. So if you're going to go to Leadville and you're going to stay overnight, get up there early and leave early the next morning so that you get out before it gets really warm. Let's talk a little bit about density altitude, just as a refresher. So we have the International Standard Atmosphere, ISA, and that's what most of our pilot operating handbooks are based on. What is the standard atmosphere at whatever altitude we're going to be operating at? ISA is defined at sea level to be 15 degrees centigrade and a pressure of 29.92 inches of mercury. Now the temperature in the ISA model, again, this is a model of how the atmosphere operates. The atmosphere almost never looks like this, but it's a model, and we can use that to base our performance on, and then adjust for temperature and altitude. So the ISA model says that temperature decreases as altitude increases at 2 degrees C per 1,000 feet, or 3.6 degrees per 1,000 Fahrenheit per 1,000 feet. So I'm using 2 degrees C per 1,000 feet. Okay, so that means at our altitude here at about 5,000 feet, our standard day is going to be about 5 degrees centigrade. You get to Leadville at 10,000 feet, the standard day is going to be minus 5 degrees centigrade. Pressure decreases as altitude increases, and it decreases at about an inch of mercury per 1,000 feet. Now, pilots are always taught that it just decreases at an inch per 1,000 feet all the way up. Not true. You get up to about 8,000 feet, and the straight line 1 inch per 1,000 feet goes away, and it starts to diverge because pressure decreases exponentially. And so as we get above about 8,000 or 9,000 feet, a straight line approximation no longer holds. That's going to show up in unusually high altimeter settings the higher you go. So if the pressure down here might be 30 inches, let's say on a typical day, you go to Leadville though, and in the same atmosphere, assuming no fronts or anything, it's just kind of a homogeneous atmosphere. The altimeter setting at Leadville might be 30.2 or 30.3. So it's unusually high compared to what it is down here. And that's because the pressure, the atmospheric pressure, does not decrease linearly, it decreases exponentially. Also, if the temperature is above standard, assuming 2992 inches of mercury as the altimeter setting, if the temperature is above standard for whatever altitude you're at, the density altitude is going to be above the airport elevation. Okay, so if we get to Leadville, standard day of minus 5 degrees centigrade, and the temperature is really 8 degrees centigrade, the density altitude is way above the 10,000 foot airport elevation. So ISA is a good way to sort of help evaluate what the density altitude is going to be. If we look at a standard day at different altitudes, sea level, 15 degrees C, 5,000 feet, so the front range basically. ISA, a standard day at 5,000 feet, 5 degrees C. A standard day at 10,000 feet, minus 5 degrees C. Now, if we look at some examples here, 97 degrees at Fort Collins, so where I have our airplane based, gives us a density altitude of 8,440 feet. If we go to Aspen at 7,800 feet, 81 degrees, nice warm day at Aspen, that's a density altitude at Aspen of almost 10,600 feet. And if we go to Leadville, a really nice day at Leadville, 70 degrees Fahrenheit, density altitude is over 12,000 feet. That's before you even turn to prop. Okay, so you can see how this could dramatically affect your airplane's performance. Now, a very rough rule of thumb for airports along the Front Range, all the way from, basically Albuquerque to Douglas or Casper, we're all in the 5,000 to 6,000 foot range. A very rough rule of thumb is if it's 85 degrees on a Front Range airport, the density altitude is about 8,500 feet. So you can see on a nice summer day here, the density altitude is already pretty high and higher than most flatlanders have flown. So it's something you really have to take into account. Some other effects of high altitude and aircraft performance. A normally aspirated engine develops about 3% less power for each 1,000 feet above sea level. So at Leadville, on a standard day, a normally aspirated engine can only develop about 70% of its rated horsepower. So you're taking off at cruise power, okay? So you need to really keep that in mind as you go up in the mountains. Some other effects are things like true airspeed is approximately 2% higher than indicated airspeed for every 1,000 feet you go up. Now, turn radius is proportional to the square of true airspeed. So the higher you go, the bigger your turn radius is going to be for any given indicated airspeed. Now remember, when you get up in most even normally aspirated airplanes, when you get up 10, 12, 13,000 feet, you're still operating at roughly the same indicated airspeed. Okay, so that you were operating at sea level or close to sea level. So your turn radius is going to be dramatically large, and that surprises people, which also means that you don't want to get yourself into a tight canyon because you think, well, I can make that turn. Well, you probably can't because of the increased turn radius because of the density altitude. And then, of course, takeoff and landing distances are greatly increased. So turn radius versus speed. The greater the speed, the wider the turn radius. The higher the altitude with the same speed, the greater the turn radius. So you have to keep that in mind when you try and get yourself in and out of a canyon. A typical performance, this is like maybe a 182 single engine aircraft, similar to a 182 maybe. Ground roll at 6,000 feet, 1,800 feet. But you get up to 10,000 feet at Leadville, you've added another 1,000 feet to that ground roll. So the ground roll is for takeoff is going to be dramatically increased. Gross weight has a large effect on aircraft performance. And so what we recommend is reducing the aircraft's weight to no more than 90% of maximum gross weight. And that will recover some of the performance that you lose at high density altitudes. It won't recover all of it, but it'll recover some. So go up light, reduce the fuel load. It isn't very far up there. You don't have to carry 8 hours of fuel or 6 hours of fuel to go mountain flying. There are places to get gas. Some of them may be expensive, but there are places to get gas up there. And it's not very far from down here. So I mean, you could get to Aspen and some airplanes in 45 minutes or an hour. So you don't need a huge amount of gas to get up there. And then put a little bit of gas on when you leave and come back to the Front Range. Now, as far as weather goes, weather is extremely important in mountain flying. We spend a lot of time in weather in the mountain flying course. But some of the nuggets that we use in the mountain flying course are these. First of all, the ceiling should be at least 2,000 feet above all the passes and the terrain en route that you're going to cross. Depending on the wind, if the wind is light, you're generally going to be crossing the terrain at about 1,000 feet above the terrain. So you need 1,000 feet for that. You need 1,000 feet of cloud clearance, since you're generally going to be above 10,000 feet. And so that's where the 2,000 feet comes from. Now, if the wind is more than 15 or 20 knots or so, you probably want to increase the terrain clearance for some reasons we'll talk about here in a second. Also, you have to remember that the reported ceilings at mountain airports will typically have to be 6,000 to 8,000 feet to have even not have the mountaintops obscured. So if let's say Leadville, if Leadville has a 4,000 foot ceiling, that still means that Massive and Elbert and all of the collegiate peaks are in the clouds. So really pay attention. You think, well, Aspen's got a 4,000 foot ceiling. Well, that's okay, but that only means that means that the top 3,000 or 4,000 feet of the surrounding terrain is still in the clouds. So be very, very cautious about looking at the mountain airport ceilings and try and make a judgment about what the actual mountaintop level weather is, because that's where you've got to fly, is the mountaintop level. Also, we recommend at least a 10-mile visibility. Now, 10 miles, because we typically are using pilotage. Now, you can certainly go out there and you can press GPS direct, and we generally don't recommend that. You know, GPS is great for situational awareness, but generally you're looking out of the airplane and looking at a sectional, either on ForeFlight or paper, if you can still find such things, and navigating by looking outside of the airplane. It's very easy to get yourself lost if the visibility is less than 10 miles up there, you know, especially in the smoky conditions like we've had the last several years with the fires in the summertime. You can get up there and get totally lost because you can't see far enough. If the visibility is only 5 or 6 miles, it's really difficult to navigate visually. And so we recommend at least 10 miles of visibility. Now, fortunately, several Colorado passes now have AWOS on them, thanks to Colorado Department of Transportation, the FAA. So you can get real-time weather at some key mountain crossing sites like Rollins Pass, Red Mountain, Wolf Creek, Rabbit Ears, and a bunch of others. So make sure you get those reports when you get your weather briefing. Now, another thing that has just happened late last year, is that at several of those AWOS stations, CDOT and the FAA have actually put up cameras. So we now have weather cameras operating, and most of the sites have 4 cameras, and we've positioned those 4 cameras in such a way that you should be able to see from the AWOS station what the weather is on typical routes going through the mountains. And starting sometime soon this year, early this year, we're going to put up 10 more camera systems at airports. So I forget where they're at, Leadville, Rifle, I think. I don't remember the airports, but there are 10 additional camera systems going in at airports. So we will have some great real-time information to be able to look at the weather real time and see what's going on, and make a judgment about whether it's safe to go flying. As I mentioned, some passes have AWOS. You can get real-time weather at the AWOSs at the passes. If you go to this website, and basically what I'd recommend is just Googling Colorado Airport Directory, and that'll probably take you right to this page. But the best thing to do is you can get this page and the previous page, which is a listing of all the AWOS systems in Colorado. And this page has the lat long, the frequency, the VHF frequency, so you can listen to it, and the phone number, so you can call it if you're sitting on the ground here at Fort Collins or Denver, and you want to know what the Copper Mountain weather is, and for some reason you can't get it on ForeFlight, you can literally call and get the real-time weather at Copper or any of these other AWOSs around the state. This page and the previous page are in the Colorado Airport directory. The new one was just published. You can go out to CDOT and pick one up at Front Range. You can go to the web page and fill out a form, and they'll send it to you. What I do is download the PDF and just keep it in ForeFlight. Keep it on my iPad. So I've always got the airport directory available to me. It's a great reference. It's got pictures of the airport. It's got great local knowledge. So I highly recommend, if you're going to fly anywhere in Colorado, not just in the mountains, get the airport directory from CDOT and use it. Now, a couple more things about weather. Everybody has probably heard about mountain wave, and so let's talk a little bit about how mountain wave forms. It's mountain wave or lee wave. That is, it's a wave on the lee side or downwind side of a mountain range. So in this diagram, we have the wind from left to right or west to east around here. And mountain wave requires a stable atmosphere. And it has to be stable because what we're going to do is lift the stable air over the mountains, or lift it orographically. Orographic lifting is simply lifting by the terrain. So in Colorado, like we've had the last several days, we have a westerly or northwesterly flow, and that's pushing stable air up over the top of the ridge. Well, for stable air, once it gets to the other side, it wants to come down slope. And so it wants to try to come down to its equilibrium level. And that causes this oscillation, which we see as what's called a standing wave. And it oscillates until it reaches its equilibrium level. And so somewhere downstream, sometimes hundreds of miles downstream, it will eventually settle out. But as you can see from this diagram, we have an updraft in one part of the wave, and we have a downdraft in the other part of the wave. And so if you're going to cross this ridge, you have to be high enough to be able to accept the downdraft that you're going to be flying into. Let's say you're going from right to left or east to west. You're going to have to be high enough to be able to accept that downdraft to be able to get over the ridge and still have enough terrain clearance. Now, this downdraft and the updraft can be 2 or 3 or 4,000 feet per minute on the bad days. So, you know, if the wind is very strong, you know, the up and down drafts can be to a point where it's just unsafe to be up there in a light airplane because you don't have the climb performance to be able to handle that. Now, here's an example. This is some actual data I took with a mountain student some years ago in a G1000 equipped 182. So this is why the 25 knot limit. So when we were doing pre-flight planning, the guy said, well, the winds aloft are forecast at 12,000 feet at 28 knots, northwesterly at 28 knots. And I said, okay, what are you going to do? Because we had just talked about, you know, being careful at 25 knots. And he said, well, we'll cross Rollins Pass at a higher altitude. So instead of 12,000, we use 13,000. I said, great, let's go try it. So I was watching the G1000, the wind indicator on the G1000, and 5 miles east of Rollins Pass, which is west of Boulder, we had winds out of the northwest at 28 knots, pretty much what the winds aloft forecast were. We crossed the ridge at 13,000 feet. The wind went to 49 knots. Smooth ride, 49 knots. And then 5 miles west of the ridge, the wind went back to 23 knots. So that's why the 25 knot limit, because the wind almost doubled going across the ridge. That's the Bernoulli effect. When you constrict the airflow, as you do in a stable atmosphere going across a ridge, you increase the speed of the fluid flow, in this case, the wind. So Bernoulli is what's causing this. And it just about doubled the wind speed going across the ridge. Now we had a smooth ride. We were in what's called laminar flow. That is where the wind is nice and smooth, like the laminar flow going across your wing. We were listening to flight service at the time, and there was an airplane below us, 1,000 feet below us, doing the same thing, same route within about 2 or 3 miles of where we were, reporting moderate turbulence. They were down in the mechanical turbulence close to the terrain, and we're getting bumped around pretty good apparently, because of that wind speed increase. So not only do you have the up and down draft in the laminar flow above the ridge, you also have to contend with the mechanical flow that is very turbulent the closer to the ridge you get. Now we were lucky. Sometimes the turbulent flow goes much higher than where we were at, but the morning we went up there, it was still laminar where we were at. The guy below us got beat up. So here are some lenticular clouds in the wave, in the crest of the wave. If there's enough moisture in the updraft, of the mountain wave, we're cooling the air because it's going up. And if there's enough moisture, a cloud will form, and that cloud forms kind of a lens-shaped cloud. And that's the lenticular clouds that we see around here a lot, especially this time of year. And then in the downdraft, as the air compresses and heats, the cloud sometimes goes away. And then in the next updraft, the cloud reappears and then it disappears again. So it appears the cloud doesn't move. And in fact, these clouds I took, this is looking south from southeast Fort Collins. These clouds were there, most of the afternoon, probably 4 or 5 hours, pretty much coming and going, but staying pretty much in the same place. Now the wave length, that is the distance from crest to crest, averages maybe 7 nautical miles or so. Depends on the wind speed, but probably 7 miles or so, give or take. So you can kind of plan on where they're going to be. Here's another picture of mountain wave. This is a smoke plume coming off a big fire west of Boulder. Now the winds, this was, this must have been 10 years ago. This was a forest fire by Sugarloaf, I think. Big fire, burned a lot of terrain up there. But you can see that it was a stable atmosphere above, very strong winds. They had like 50 knot winds up in Netherlands the day I took this picture. But there was mountain wave, and you can see the regular wave-shaped form there that the smoke was entrained in. Here's a mountain wave cloud, a lenticular up high. On the left-hand side, sort of a saucer-shaped formation that's right above Long's Peak. This is looking southwest from our house here north of Fort Collins. And Long's Peak is right below that area there. But that's a lenticular cloud. Gives us nice sunsets in the wintertime. And then, as I said, in the if there's enough moisture at the crest of the mountain wave, you'll often see lenticular clouds. And then underneath the crest, especially the first crest after the mountain range, the air going across underneath that crest is causing the atmosphere to rotate, and we'll get a rotor. We'll get basically a horizontal vortex under that first crest and any crests farther out east. And the rotor is usually associated with at least severe turbulence. And so you really want to avoid that. So the first crest around here is going to be, like right along the front range, probably over, maybe Boulder Airport, sometimes right over Fort Collins, certainly over Metro Airport or Jeffco, depending on how old you are, and so on. And then under each succeeding crest, as you go east, it tends to be at about mountaintop level or slightly below. So around here, they're going to be, the rotor is going to be in the 10 to 12,000, maybe 13,000 foot range. But it's just a place you want to avoid. And if there's moisture, there will be what's called a fractal cumulus. And they sort of look like this. They look like cotton candy. And if you sit there and watch them, you can actually see them rotate. But the key characteristic here, a couple of things. Number one, they're in lines. So they're in lines parallel to the mountain range. And secondly, they don't move laterally. You can see them rotate, but they're not moving laterally, and they pretty much stay in the same altitude. Here's another one, and we see a couple of streets here of rotors. Now, normally you'd look at those, especially in the summertime, you might say, oh, gee, those are just puffy little cumulus clouds. But the key is they're not moving laterally, and they sort of come and go, and they are literally fractured. They are fractal cumulus, and extreme, very, very likely, certainly moderate turbulence, if not greater. Now here's a time lapse of rotor clouds. So we have several streets of them, and you can actually see them. I think I can mark on them. So we have a street here and a street here. There's another one that pops up here occasionally, and then another one here. But you can see how the clouds are rotating in the wave, and they're staying pretty much in the same place. They sort of come and go occasionally, depending on how much moisture there is, and just not a place to be. They're also relatively low in the atmosphere. This is just west of us here, north of Fort Collins. This is my personal rotor cloud right here. I look at that first thing in the morning, and if I see a rotor cloud out there, I turn around and go back to bed. Otherwise, I might consider going flying, but I always look for the rotor clouds. And if there's one there, I usually don't go flying because of the chance of moderate or greater turbulence. Another thing to look at for a strong wind indication is blowing snow. Now there's a lot of snow up there now, and so you can sometimes, especially in the afternoon with the sun behind the snow, you can see snow blowing across the tops of the ridges. And usually that's going to indicate winds at the ridges of, probably, I don't know how much it takes to blow, especially crested snow, probably 30, 35 knots or so. So if the snow is blowing, the wind is already probably unsafe for flying in the mountains in a light airplane. So be wary of that if you see blowing snow up there. A tool that we have now to judge the severity of turbulence is called the Graphical Turbulence Guidance tool. If you go to Aviation, the Aviation Weather Center, aviationweather.gov, and you look for under forecast, you can see turbulence, and it'll take you to the Graphical Turbulence Guidance tool. And you can select the size of your aircraft. So here I've got light selected up at the upper left-hand corner here. Plot is, I've selected combined because I want both clear air turbulence and mountain wave turbulence. I don't care what causes the turbulence, I just want to know what's there. And then you can select your vertical level. So here I've got 11,000 feet selected. And the darker the color, the worse the turbulence is likely to be. So you can see in Colorado, we have some possible moderate turbulence throughout most of the Rockies. You get up into Wyoming, some possible severe turbulence up north, and so on. So this is a really good forecasting tool to take a look at. Now, if you have ForeFlight, you can also see this, but it's a static display. If you use the aviationweather.gov tool, you can actually change the time. And let me go back here. You can change the time. You can sort of scroll through and see how the turbulence is forecast to change. So again, it's a really good tool to take a look at and learn how to use. Another thing to consider is radar. Now, most of us are probably flying with ADS-B radar, and that's a great thing. Gives us a lot of data, but you have to consider a couple of things when you're flying the mountains. First of all, radar doesn't go through granite, and so the mountains are going to hinder how the radar beam can see down low. Radar, and there's basically 4 radars that I look at. There's the radar at Front Range Airport, just south of DIA. Up here to the north, we use Cheyenne. There's a radar at Grand Junction, and there's a radar at Pueblo. But none of those radars can see below about 23,000 feet over the Central Rockies. So if there's something going on in the Central Rockies that's below 23,000, you're not going to see it with radar. So in this case, you barely see what are probably some tops down in the lower where that arrow is, down between Gunnison and Aspen. So there's probably some stuff there, and the radar just isn't seeing it very well because you can't see through the granite. So it's just barely seeing the tops. So you have to consider that. So on ForeFlight or aviationweather.gov, I supplement this with the satellite image, because the satellite can see, down to the ground. So if I think there's something going on down there, especially in the wintertime, because the wintertime systems tend to be lower in the atmosphere because of the cold weather. So I supplement that with the satellite view and try and see what's going on. So use radar, but use it carefully because it's not telling you the whole story because of the limitations of radar. Now, Bernoulli again, wind through passes, just like we talked about going over the tops of ridges. If you go through a narrow valley, the wind's going to increase through the pass. So if you've got a reasonably strong wind outside the pass, it's going to increase dramatically going through that pass. So keep that in mind. And then wind around terrain. So here we've got a couple of things. This is Taylor Reservoir looking southwest toward Gunnison. So we have wind coming over the top of that ridge. So there's likely to be turbulence on the lee side of the ridge down here if you get really close to the ridge. We've also got a narrowing in this valley over here coming up from Gunnison. And so there's going to be turbulence in there as well. So what you want to do if you're going through here is to try and figure out where the updrafts are going to be. Well, the wind coming over the ridge here, this is going to be a downdraft here. So I probably don't want to fly too close to this ridge here. I may be able to find an updraft somewhere in this valley. So I'm going to play with it again with plenty of altitude and out. So if I get surprised and find a downdraft, I want to be able to turn away. So I'm going to figure out where the wind is blowing and try and find an updraft on one or the other side of this ridge as I go down valley into Gunnison. But I certainly don't want to be in here because of the turbulence and the downdraft from that wind coming over the ridge. This is Salida looking southwest, runway 24. And Salida and other airports like this have some other constrictions that may cause us some issue. If the wind is out of the south, southwest, or west, as it often is, or probably usually is at Salida, the wind coming across that slope, the slope goes down a couple of 100 feet, we're going to have a downdraft coming off that runway. So what do we do? Well, it's a long runway. This particular one is a long runway. We're flying into a headwind. And so rather than trying to put it on the numbers where we probably would normally, I'm gonna aim another 2,000 or 3,000 feet down the runway and just fly a normal approach. A lot of people say, well, I'll do a steep approach, I'll do a short field approach. This runway's 6,500 feet long, I think. You don't need to do a short field approach. Just land farther down the runway. You know, assuming you're flying a mortal airplane and not a jet. But you're going to have to, and if you fly just a normal approach but aim farther down, you're gonna fly probably over most of that downdraft, and it won't affect you very much. So anytime there's a situation, a terrain situation like this, you want to pay attention to that and plan your arrival. Now, Leadville's the same way. Leadville has a downslope here at the south end of the runway, but the terrain isn't necessarily the biggest problem here. On either side of the runway, we're looking north here. This is runway 34. On either side of the runway, we have some 50, 60-foot pine trees. And if the wind is out of the west or northwest, as it usually is at Leadville, what's going to happen is we're going to have a downdraft. We're going to have turbulence because of the trees, and they put a downdraft right over the runway. And this has actually caused a few accidents. People take off and they pull the gear up in a retractable gear airplane, they hit the downdraft and settle back onto the runway. So if there are obstructions around the runway, pay attention to them. Aspen has a 300 or 400 foot mountain right next to the runway. So they often have a downdraft right over the runway there as well. But even just trees like this along the runway can be as obstruction enough if the wind is moderate or certainly strong to cause a problem with takeoffs and landings. Now, in a stable atmosphere, orographic lifting is going to give us a cap cloud if there's enough moisture. And a cap cloud is just caused by that moist, stable air being pushed up over the windward side of the mountains. We cool it adiabatically at 3 degrees C per 1,000 feet until it saturates. And then at the moist adiabatic lapse rate, about 1.5 to 2 degrees C per 1,000 feet. So we're cooling the air as it goes up slope. And if there's enough moisture, it'll precipitate. On the downward slide, on the lee side, we've taken moisture out, and so as the air comes down slope, it's now drier. It warms because of compression, and so we have downslope winds that are warmer and much drier coming out here on the eastern plains, and that's why there's often no lee clouds over here. Now, the cap cloud is just a layer of cloud that you see right across the top of the ridge. You say, well, you know, there's probably just a little clouds right along the ridge. Well, that little piece of cloud is just the top of a more general cloud situation on the west side of the ridge. Here's what it looks like. This is looking off into to the southwest into the San Luis Valley. So the San Luis Valley is fogged in the day I took this picture. And as the wind is pushing that moist air upslope and over the ridge, as it comes over the ridge on the eastern side, it's dissipating. As it comes downslope, it warms and it dissipates the cloud. Now turning around, literally turning 180 degrees, same area, we've got on the lee side, on the lee side here, the wind is coming downslope, clouds are dissipating. It's a stable atmosphere because there's no vertical development on these clouds. However, if you look back towards Salida and the Collegiate Peaks, we have cumulus clouds. So the air is stable where I'm at here, but off to the north and northwest, it's unstable because we've got cumulus clouds building. So somewhere between where I'm at and where those clouds are, there's a boundary of some sort. There's a front, maybe a cold front, and it's a boundary between stable air and unstable air. So it's probably turbulence and and then the thunderstorms building up here. Here's a cap cloud, or what's sometimes called a Foehn wall. And there's no vertical development, so it's a stable atmosphere. The winds were howling. The winds were probably 80 or 90 knots at mountaintop level. Long's Peak is off on the left-hand side here in the clouds. We have some rotor clouds. So I got rotor clouds here and here. And but again, no vertical development on this layer, the cap cloud across the top of the ridge. So it's a stable atmosphere. But again, this would be a very bad day to go flying in probably anything. So the airliners are probably getting beat up descending and departing out of Denver. Light airplanes simply would not be safe to do that. Now, if we have an unstable atmosphere, we lift that unstable air up and it creates cumulus clouds, like we saw a couple of slides ago. And they can, if there's enough moisture, they can develop into our afternoon thunderstorms. So a lot of times in the summertime, about 11 or 12 o'clock, especially in June, late May and June, maybe first part of July, where there's enough moisture around and enough heating, we'll get an unstable atmosphere. We get that unstable air pushing the air upslope and causing the thunderstorms to develop right along the divide. Now, they sometimes will move out east, and you'll look up there and you say, well, it's Long's Peak is covered in a thunderstorm, Pikes Peak's covered in a thunderstorm. We're going to get a nice thunderstorm out here. As it moves out east, it often is moving into very dry air out east. So our dry air out here will simply cause that thunderstorm. There's nothing to sustain the thunderstorm, and so the thunderstorm will just dissipate. And we'll think, well, we got to get a good rain shower, and it just dissipates before it gets here. What we need is moist and continued unstable air out here in the eastern plains for that thunderstorm to develop and continue to develop out east here. So here's what we're looking at. This is behind Long's Peak looking south. So I'm over, probably Cameron Pass in that area. Looking south, we have the warm, unstable air, moist air being pushed upslope, and it is causing a line of cumulus to develop right along the ridge. And this can be a problem, getting east or west across the Continental Divide, because you can see there may not be a lot of cloud clearance between the bottom of those clouds and the tops of the ridges. So you may have to do some serious deviation to find a safe route going around the cumulus. Now, if there's enough moisture, the cumulus, in this case, I'm looking north, roughly the same place, looking north. Now there's enough instability built up that we have a thunderstorm developed, and this will actually move out and probably give some good rain to these eastern plains. It just depends on how much moisture there is and how dry it is out here in the east. If it's dry out here, once those showers get over the divide, they're just going to dissipate because there's not enough moisture to sustain them. They need some support out here. Now also, if you think you're going to fly underneath some of those cumulus, think about this. This is hail at Conifer. This is, I borrowed this from 9 News about 3 or 4 years ago. So Conifer's about 8,300 feet, and they had some pea-sized hail. Now, if the thunderstorm that dropped this actually moved over Denver, the hail has another 3,000 feet to melt. And so Denver probably didn't get any hail, or may not have gotten any hail, probably didn't. It was rain by the time it descended that 3,000 feet. So remember that flying underneath some of these high base thunderstorms that we might have around here, while they may look reasonable to fly underneath, the hail, if there is hail, and there probably is hail, maybe just small hail, but the hail hasn't had time to melt. And so the higher you get, the more likely it is you're going to be in the hard stuff. Now, this stuff may not do any serious damage to the airplane, but it sure is going to make a lot of noise and is going to beat up the paint job. Now, we also have upslope, where we have the moisture on the east side of the divide, and we have either a high or a low pressure, depending on where it's at, pushing that moisture, the Gulf moisture, upslope up to the on the east side of the divide. And as it comes upslope, it cools adiabatically. We get low clouds and fog down here. And a lot of times that cold air is not deep enough to get over the continental divide. So the top of that cold air may be 10,000 feet. Well, that's not enough to get over the divide. And so the west slope can be in sunshine and clear clouds. The east side, we can be in low clouds and fog all day. So if you're suitably equipped and qualified, you file IFR, go to 12,000 feet, get in the sun, cancel IFR, and be on your way westbound. So what gets pilots in trouble? Continue to fly into stuff like this. If you're looking out the windscreen and it looks like that, turn around. Don't just keep flying thinking it's going to get better. It's not. This is what a cap cloud looks like on the backside. Okay, it's you know, we got snow showers and rain showers and probably some thunderstorms. So if it looks like that, turn around, go the other direction. Also, we recommend no IFR and no night. A couple of reasons. IFR, the MEAs are 16,000 feet and higher. As you go west out of Denver and Fort Collins and Colorado Springs, the MEAs started at 15.5 at the lowest. So certainly in a non-turbocharged airplane, that ain't going to work. In a turbocharged airplane, that's okay, except remember, once you get to 16,000 feet, you got to be able to stay there. So if there are strong up and down drafts, you know, the up and down drafts, even in moderate winds, might be 1,000 feet per minute up and down. If you're at 16,000 feet and you get 1,000 foot per minute downdraft, does your turbocharged whatever have enough climb capability to outclimb that 1,000 foot per minute downdraft? So think about that. Night is a dicey thing. I know people who love to fly at night in the mountains. I don't. Some people say, well, on a full moon, it's just like daylight. Okay, I don't. It's just too risky, because if you lose an engine, you have to land out. It just adds to the risk of trying to find a place to land. So we recommend day VFR only for general aviation. Also, here's the a localizer DME approach into Aspen. You'll notice it starts at 13,400 feet, and it goes all the way down to 9,840 feet. That's 2,000 feet above the ground. So it's got to be pretty good VFR in the Aspen Valley for this IFR approach to even work. So, you know, we just recommend not doing it. Also, the descent angle for this approach is almost 7 degrees. It's not your typical 3-degree approach slope. So keep that in mind. A couple of things about emergency procedures. After landing, if you have to do an emergency landing for whatever reason, stay with the airplane. Time and time again, CAP, and I belong to CAP. I've flown with CAP for a number of years. We've found people face down in the snow 200 yards away from the airplane because I thought, well, I see a farmhouse just down there. Well, that farmhouse is you know, 2 miles away, and it's down some very steep, rocky cliffs and so on. Stay with the airplane. The airplane's a lot easier to find than a person is. Keep warm, stay dry, drink fluids, activate the ELT, and don't turn it off. Let your rescuers turn off the ELT. If you have a handheld radio, try and contact other aircraft. 121.5, a lot of people are monitoring 121.5. We all should be. And then have something to signal. A radio, smoke possibly, flares if you want to carry pyrotechnics. I used to, but I don't do that anymore. A signal mirror. Get one of these glass Air Force survival signal mirrors, not the tin ones, not a CD or DVD. Get a glass signal mirror. They're about 4.5 by 5.5 inches. I think Sporties or somebody has one. If the sun is out, and a lot of times even if the moon is out, they will drive a search crew out of the cockpit. They're so bright. You can see them for literally miles. So get a mirror and learn how to use it. It's a great attention-getting tool. Also, everybody on board the aircraft ought to have the warm clothing as if to walk out of the course that you're flying over at night. Now, I don't want you to walk out of the course you're flying over at night. I want you to stay with the airplane, but I want you to be able to stay warm and dry. Pilot or somebody ought to have some matches and a Swiss Army knife in their pockets in case you can't get a survival kit out when you leave the airplane. The airplane may burn. A lot of times the airplane will burn. So you need to get out of the airplane quickly, take whatever you can, but get out quickly, get away from the airplane and find out if it's going to burn. If it's not going to burn after a few minutes, then it might be a good shelter, but wait and find out if it's going to burn. And then finally, as those of us who've been around Colorado for a long time understand that mountains have winter 365 days of the year, or can have. Here's a hazardous weather outlook from Denver National Weather Service from August 18th, 2005. And it said, rain showers likely on the front range, so on and so forth, maybe a few embedded thunderstorms. The higher foothills and mountains, up to 2 inches of snow possible by Wednesday morning, whenever this was. It snowed on Trail Ridge Road overnight. So just keep that in mind. I mean, this happens all the time. So the mountains are always prime for winter weather, regardless of what the calendar says. So just be prepared for it. Survival preparation. The best survival preparation you can have is take a good mountain flying course. I don't care if you take ours or somebody else's. I hope you take ours, but take a good mountain flying course. And that does not mean, 2 hours with an instructor and a couple hours flying over the front range. Our course is about 8 hours, like I said, I think earlier, 5 or 6 hours flying with a good mountain flying instructor. So get some good mountain training. Again, like I said, I don't care if it's hours or not, but get some good mountain training and learn how to fly up there safely. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And let's see, go back to Zoom. So anybody have any questions, comments, war stories, whatever?
I have a statement, maybe.
Sure.
Gary. There was in October of 1970 a Wichita State charter.
Yeah.
Took off from Stapleton going to Logan.
Yep.
And decided they would go the scenic route up the canyon and wound up near the Eisenhower Tunnel. There's some really good reading in that if you go back and you can just make a note of every bad decision that they made all the way up until it crashed and killed 31 people.
Yeah, they were trying to go up Loveland Pass. I think that was before the Eisenhower Tunnel was built. Actually,
they were working on it.
Yeah, and it was a Martin 404, a big transport category twin, and there were two of them. One went around and one decided, well, we're just going to take the scenic route. And even that big airplane could not out climb the terrain. We strongly recommend don't going over Loveland Pass. Don't go up I-70 because you get up at the tunnel, and most airplanes cannot turn around quickly enough in that bowl there. There was an accident, an Ohio couple and their son were killed about, 5 years ago in a Cherokee 180. He took off from Jeffco and asked the person behind the counter, is I-70 a good way? They were going to Moab. Is I-70 a good way to get to Moab? And the gal said, yeah, probably. And so they took off, had no mountain experience, flew up, got to the ridge, ran out of altitude and ideas all at the same time, and ended up doing a stall spin and crashed and killed all three of them. Again, basically the same bad decisions were made. So we recommend not going over that. There are lots of alternate ways to get over the ridges. Don't do Independence Pass, don't do Loveland Pass, and some days don't do Monarch Pass. There are alternates nearby that are better places to go. Thanks for bringing that up. Any other comments or questions?
Rollins Pass is a fairly easy one to find, being sort of right next to the Eldora ski area, and it's reasonably flat for a pass. And
yeah,
it's like going over that if I'm going somewhere out in that direction.
Yeah, Rollins Pass is a really good place to go over if you're going from the Denver area over to the West Slope.
What's the difference between Rollins and Rollins Pass and Corona?
I think it's about 100 yards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're the same place.
We've flown in an underpowered Mooney over Corona quite a bit, and it's kind of interesting because as you get closer to it, you hit some downdrafts and you just slowly sink and sink and sink.
Yep.
But if you keep going, then pretty soon you hit about 1,000 to 1,500 foot updraft, and you make a few turns and get across at 13, 14,000.
Yeah. Yeah, you need to, you always need to expect the downdraft on the east side of the mountains. And so you always want to have enough altitude and out in case you get into a downdraft you can't handle.
Sure.
So, if you're gonna go across Rollins Pass on a calm day, 12,000 is usually okay. If there's much wind, 13,000, and then monitor the VSI. And if it looks like you're not going to be able to do it, you turn away and get some more altitude.
Is Levita Pass the lowest way if you're going sort of south first? Or that's a reasonably easy pass too as a relatively inexperienced mountain pilot? Yeah,
I think, I don't get down there very often, but Levita is probably okay. Hayden Pass, it's quite a ways farther north, but if you're going into the San Luis Valley, Hayden Pass is a way to do it. But yeah, that's probably okay. Levita Pass, or I think it's North Levita Pass. Just want to be really careful though with the winds down there. And then for Monarch Pass, there's a pass just north of there called Marshall Pass. So if the winds are very strong across going between Gunnison and Salida, I usually go through Poncha Pass and then over to Marshall Pass and go across that way. And it's just a little bit out of the way. Most of these detours are not very far out of the way. You go, if instead of going to Loveland Pass, you go to Rollins Pass, and just do it that way. It's instead of Independence Pass, you go to lost my pass there. Anyway, there's a pass going off from Turquoise Lake. Anyway, can't think of the name. Anyway, it's a much better way to get across going from Leadville over to Aspen than Independence Pass. Okay, anything else?
I was just reading Margaret Lamb's Flying Colorado Mountain Weather book.
Uh-huh.
And She mentioned a bunch of this phenomena I had never heard about before that she calls windward side downdrafts.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what you've heard about those or how that works at all.
Yeah, they're called that or called drainage winds. First thing in the morning, when the west slope is in shadow and the east slope, the tops of the ridges are starting to get sun on them, you'll get an updraft, you get an up valley wind on the sunny side of the ridge. And as that gets to the top of the ridge, it will be a downdraft on the west side. And if you're really close to the ridge, expecting to find an updraft, because typically we're going to have winds out of the west coming across the ridges. So if you're on the west side trying to go east, and you're right up against the ridge trying to find that updraft, you may get into that downdraft coming down because of the valley wind coming up on the east side. The east side, the tops of the ridges start to get warm. You get that upslope on the east side. It goes over the top and becomes a downdraft on the west side where you're expecting an updraft. Now, personally, I think that's probably overplayed a little bit because you would have to be pretty close to the terrain to find that. And typically, I'm not going to be that close to the terrain unless you're a helicopter pilot or doing search or something like that. But it is a real thing. You can really get a downsloping wind, but it will be on the west side in the cool air before the sun has started to heat the west side of that ridge.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
So what if you were at Eagle? I mean, from Eagle westward, is following I-70 a reasonable strategy? I mean, obviously you're not flying as needed around anything in your way, but
yeah, it's okay. Yeah, it's okay. You want to be kind of high going across the flat tops because it's pretty inhospitable terrain. If you just follow, Glenwood Canyon, there are some places up high, especially on the south side of I-70, if you had an engine problem where you could land. So yeah, you could certainly do that, but you want to make sure that you're high enough so that you leave yourself an out in case you have an engine problem. But yeah, that's a reasonable thing to do, because once you get to Glenwood Springs, it's it's downhill from there. So you can pretty much get down to 7,000 feet and go all the way to California.
Okay, well, if there are no other questions, thank you very much, Bill, for a very interesting, informative talk. And
glad to do it.
Yeah, as Bill said at the beginning, we will be having some mountain flying class, at least one, we hope, this year, COVID permitting. So I hope you will take that. If you haven't, looks like we probably have a lot of experienced mountain pilots here, but if you're new to the area, I definitely support Bill's assertion that you absolutely need to do some training with an experienced mountain flying CFI and take the ground course. Okay, well, I guess we'll call it there. And this will be recorded. If any of your friends want to see it, it's still recording, in fact, so I'm going to stop it in a minute. And once again, thank you, Bill. We really appreciate the talk.
Thanks a lot.
You're quite welcome. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill.
You bet.